Alright, this is our next video in the 1960s. Now, the 1960s was all about protest. I've already covered the anti-war thing. I included that with the Cold War, and I'm not including the African-American civil rights because there's an entire unit on that. So these are the other movements of the 1960s, namely women and the Chicanos or the Latinos, the Native Americans. I'm going to get into the counterculture a little bit here. All these things, okay? So, here we go. First video is all about the women's movement, okay? Now, we call the women's movement sometimes the sexual revolution. The first sexual revolution ended in 1919 with the women's right to vote. And there was a little bit up and down, but if you remember the 1950s, we had the idea of the Good Housewife's Guide, and the women were supposed to stay in the home, men were supposed to work. Betty Friedan really kind of squashed this idea, and her book, The Feminine Mystique, is going to launch the second sexual revolution. Now, what is the second sexual revolution all about? It starts off with equal respect in jobs, equal opportunities, equal pay, all the way up to an Equal Rights Amendment, which ultimately is shot down by women themselves. But this book is kind of the spark to increase that, okay? So that's why it's the first slide. Now, after this happens, we have what is called the modern women's liberation movement, and this is where we get the term feminist, all right? Now, a feminist is someone who believes in equal rights for women. They want equality of gender, and they want gender to be a non-issue. Now, what would this look like if this was 100% gender equality? The bathroom signs would be non-existent. You could go in any bathroom you wanted to, essentially, as well as you're filling out a paper and they wouldn't be able to ask you your gender, male or female. And a lot of them now say optional, right? But there you go with that. Now, they do succeed early on in getting past the Equal Pay Act. This says that if you have the same amount of experience and you're working in the same occupation, you should receive the same pay. A really excellent example is a teacher. A teacher who comes out with their bachelor's degree, male or female, will receive the same pay. Now, the only thing that works differently is if you go and get your master's degree or your national boards or you get a doctorate or something like that, you'll receive more pay because you've put more effort into your education. All right? Now, some women were upset at this Equal Pay Act because there existed a glass ceiling. Imagine you're in a room and there's no door in the room, there's no wall in the room, there's no ladder, there's nothing for you to stand on, there's you and a 10-foot high ceiling. The ceiling is made of glass and you can see a room full of money and full of everything you'd possibly dream of. You would almost drive yourself mad because you could see that opportunity, but you have no way of achieving that. Women feel that way sometimes in promotion, and so the glass ceiling refers to discrimination in promotion of jobs, meaning that women could only go as high, and then they could see all these other people and all these opportunities, but never actually fully obtain them. Okay? In other words, Equal Pay Act is not where we need to stop. We need to keep going. Now, this feminist movement promotes or prompts Gloria Steinem to start a magazine called Ms. Magazine, MS. In this magazine, she's going to promote women who are doing things kind of extraordinary. She's going to have women athletes, she's going to have writers and artists and whatever. Okay? She's kind of the voice for this Equal Rights Amendment, etc. Now, speaking of the Equal Rights Amendment, or the ERA, this would have said that you're removing the gender or the sex term off of anything. In other words, everyone will be 100% equal, regardless, male or female. Now, as I said, this actually goes up for debate in Congress, and it falls short. Now, it actually falls short because there was a group of women fighting it. They were called the anti-feminist. Now, anti-feminist, you can see one here. She actually has that stop ERA, that stop sign. So if you see ERA and a stop sign, you know it's anti-feminist. Now, you can see in the background, preserve the family, our heritage, etc. Anti-feminists tended to be the older generation of women. They were afraid that if the Equal Rights Amendment was passed, traditional norms and expectations and traditions women had held for very high standards would dissipate or disappear, such as holding doors open, pulling chairs out, standing up when a woman enters or leaves the room, things like that that you may not see anymore. So they're the ones who really kind of promoted this idea. And what do we really have here? It's a generation gap. The younger generation of women want equality. The older generation say, know your place. And they ultimately come to a kind of a compromise. And no bigger example of this was a compromise than Roe v. Wade in the 70s. And we'll get to that in a moment, okay? Now, the big voice of the anti-feminist movement was a woman named Phyllis Schlafly. She has many books. One of the interesting books was called Who Killed the American Family? And she in essence, is blaming the U.S. government for helping pass these equality rights, right? So that is it really for women's rights here in the 1960s. Now, I will pick up women's rights again in the 1970s and maybe a little bit in the 2000s as it pertains to them. But this is the second sexual revolution. So there were some successes, but ultimately the Equal Rights Amendment, the big thing they wanted, did not pass. All right? The next video is about Native Americans and Latinos and other minority groups.